Starfield.
After so many years of Fallout and Elder Scrolls games, Todd and the team are finally doing something different. Well, kind of.
Like our previous games, it's an epic role-playing game where you get to be who you want and go where you want. But this time, you'll be exploring space.
According to Todd, Starfield is basically Skyrim in space mixed with Fallout in space. If you're a fan of Bethesda's games, it looks like you're in luck.
Who's laughing now?
Because this does look like that create a character, wander around a world, talk to whoever you want, loot a bunch of stuff, level up skills, craft items, kind of action RPG that we've been playing for 25 years. But it also looks like another game Bethesda didn't make, No Man's Sky. In the first bit of gameplay, Todd brings us to a moon called Crete. We come across this mining laser bit where we gather some iron. This is the first time I was like, yeah, this does look like No Man's Sky. If you played that game for 5 minutes, you recognize this immediately. It's the same process for mining materials. But this is just one of many, many comparisons I've seen, because ever since the big reveal, the narrative has been Starfield looks like No Man's Sky. IGN made this montage, which shows that yes, indeed, Starfield and No Man's Sky are both space games, where you walk around in a spacesuit, you see alien creatures, and you fly a spaceship. But if you take the whole of the gameplay and actually what's going on and think about what makes a Bethesda game, this looks more like a Bethesda game than anything to me. I mean, just look at the lockpicking, the character creation, the dialogue scenes. Actually, the game that Starfield really looks like to me is The Outer Worlds. That game's actually an open world RPG where you make choices and go on quests, and the formula of killing and looting and all of that is way more like a Bethesda game because it's made by Obsidian, who made Fallout New Vegas. Another thing people have been pointing out is the shooting, and I do think it looks rough. I don't know if it's because this was recorded in 30 FPS or they gave the controller to a monkey, but it doesn't seem quite as tight as, say, Fallout 4 does. But then again, when I think back, the Fallout 4 reveal trailer combat didn't look the best either. So, hey, maybe it'll be better in the game. I'm waiting to see more on that. Speaking of 30 FPS, the performance in this thing looks janky. You know, people say Bugthesda for a reason. They've definitely earned that reputation over the years. But the one thing that gives me hope is that Starfield isn't coming out this year. It just got delayed. Apparently, the whole game is playable from start to finish right now, which means Bethesda should be spending the next 6 or so months polishing. That's a lot of time to fix any problems that should come up, but I'm not holding my breath for a perfect launch. There's gonna be problems, but I just hope they're not game-breaking. And then Todd said this at the very end.
Let's take a look at one of our planets, Jemison. You can land into Atlantis, but you can also land and explore anywhere on the planet. And it's not just this planet, it's all the planets in the system. From barren but resource-heavy ice balls to Goldilocks planets with life. And not just this system, but over 100 systems. Over 1,000 planets, all open for you to explore.
I feel like maybe 10 years ago, people would have lost their minds at this. 1,000 planets to explore across 100 systems. But we've seen so many big open world games that sort of sacrifice the size of their worlds for the actual gameplay experience. You're spending more time traveling between point A and point B with nothing interesting to do, rather than having it be fun the entire time. This is another reason No Man's Sky gets brought up, because it famously uses procedural generation to give new players new planets to explore that have never been found before. Now, I haven't played No Man's Sky since the billion updates that it's, received and all the praise that it's gotten for continuing to improve, which is great and all, but my memory of No Man's Sky is finding a lot of empty, barren planets with not quite a lot of things to do. There's some mining materials, perhaps you could build a base on that planet, but it's very much like an empty landscape for you to sort of craft and make your own. I think that's what a lot of people remember about No Man's Sky, whether it's true now or not. That's the parallel that's being drawn with Starfield. Now, obviously, when you talk about 1,000 planets, there is no way Bethesda could have been working on this game for 10 years and it wouldn't have been long enough for them to handcraft and create that many planets. Just 2 years ago, Todd Howard explained that Bethesda is using procedural generation in order to create the map in Starfield and The Elder Scrolls 6. Whenever that comes out. But it's also true that Bethesda has used procedural generation in the past to generate their maps, and then they go back through and add things to sort of populate it and make it feel real and alive. But again, I don't think even if Bethesda was given 10 years to work on Starfield, that they could have procedurally generated 1,000 planets and then gone back through and populated them to make them all feel like good and interesting. Plus, there's another thing. Apparently, you can land anywhere on any of these planets and explore. We still don't know how big each map is going to be, but yeah, it's like this thing is going to be massive. So if you do the math, if you like apply some basic logic, there's no way that every single location you visit in Starfield is going to feel handcrafted. But the trick is, how do they make that interesting, you know? And I think we don't know enough yet about the moment-to-moment gameplay to answer that question. There's still unknowns with Starfield. One thing I will say is going back and playing a lot of Fallout and Skyrim, Bethesda does know how to craft a gameplay loop. So what I mean by that is making it interesting moment to moment in these larger worlds. Like, you get a quest, you kind of go on your way, but it's sort of a wanderlust experience where something catches your eye, or there's a dynamic world where interesting things happen around you that sort of pull your attention away, and then you just get lost and you wander and you talk to new people and you just kind of get sucked into the experience of being in that world. What happens when you give players a spaceship and say you can go to 1,000 planets and land anywhere on them and explore? I don't know. Nobody knows. And the closest answer we have to that is No Man's Sky. So that's why this comparison, it's like, it makes a lot of sense on a surface level to me. I mean, just look at the star map. That's another obvious comparison here. You can tell that we're going to be navigating via a star map. But the key difference here, we actually know from that same developer interview, Todd explains we are all going to be playing the same map. We're all going to have the same 1,000 planets. So that means Bethesda isn't just running a procedural thing every single time you go to a new planet. That planet exists in everyone's game. So maybe that means they've had the time to go in and sort of personalize those places and make them feel real rather than computer generated. There's a lot more to dive into, but I don't want to make this like a trailer breakdown analysis video like I used to do a million years ago. Things I do want to point out, these cities look really good to me. I mean, they look populated, so many people, just actual life walking around. And one thing I've noticed playing Bethesda's previous games is, for the most part, except for like guards and enemies, everyone has a name. And I think that's really important for a game. You can't just have like spaceship dude number 5, you know? Everyone should have a name. Everyone should have a little something to say, even if it's one line. Like, that adds so much to an atmosphere and making a game feel real. So I hope they went that route with these cities. These faces look really good to me. And by really good, I mean for a Bethesda game where if there's 1,000 planets, gosh, I don't know how many NPCs there's gonna be, right? Like, they look good enough to where, yeah, this looks like a real human being that I'm interacting with, not just someone spitting out lines, you know, like a robot. The UI in this game looks really clean, and I think Bethesda's always had a knack for a clean UI. Maybe not the most functional. I'm thinking about you, Skyrim, with your favorites menu. Like, things could get better. They've gotten a lot better, like with Fallout 4 and being able to favorite things on a controller with the D-pad like that was huge. We already see that in some of the gameplay, you know, switching between weapons, but I think it looks really slick so far. And then the character creator, I think, looks fantastic, especially if you're a fan of Bethesda's action RPGs. It really does feel like they brought in the best of the last 3 big games, not counting 76. We don't talk about Fallout 76 here. But yeah, getting to choose your background and then getting to choose sort of like a starter skill set is very Bethesda. And also the traits, some really wacky, interesting ideas there. That's also very The Outer Worlds. And then we actually got to see what the skills menu looks like and how you level these things up. And that's awesome. I think a nice blend of how Skyrim worked, where as you use something, you get better at doing that. I think that is a really good system for an RPG, especially a Bethesda game. And then you have the more survival elements. So gathering materials, building your own outposts and actually outfitting them. Then that extends to building your own spaceship, which nobody expected. A lot of people were debating whether manual spaceflight would even be in the game. I know that was a huge conversation on the Starfield subreddit, but like when that was shown, I think a lot of people lost their minds, you know? It far exceeded expectations. To me, I've never been a fan of base building. It's just not super fun to me. I don't love the idea of gathering a bunch of materials. That's very much like a survival crafting sort of game experience. But at the same time, it looks like if I want to just build one outpost, probably as part of the main mission, get a bunch of people to run it for me, then I won't even have to worry about it, which is, you know, something I'm hoping for. But yeah, I mean, give me that shipbuilding. That looks really fun. And the fact that I can hire a crew for my ship as well. Like, it just kind of takes several steps further in a lot of sci-fi games that we haven't seen. And one final thing before we close out the video that I think is really big. I think if Starfield had a voice protagonist, we would have seen it. And the reason we didn't see it is because it doesn't exist. Bethesda confirmed on Twitter as I was making this video, there is no voice protagonist. It's silent. So you may be wondering, why am I excited about this? Why is this a good thing? It's so clear to me after playing Fallout 4 and then going back to Skyrim that as an RPG, it's so important to have a silent protagonist where you can project your own story, your own headcanon, whatever, into the player and into the world. When you're choosing just from 4 options from a voice that's been pre-recorded, it's great for the presentation, I won't lie, it looks better, but at the same time, it limits what we can do as the player and how we can interact with the world. So the fact that they've decided to go backwards in that sense actually is a step forward for me, especially as an RPG. So there's just a lot to be excited about for Starfield, but I really do want to see more. Particularly, I want to see more combat. I want to see that be a little less janky. And I also want to see this in like true 60 FPS. I want this to be like running well. And I think once we see that, that'll be really exciting. So I guess my message with this video is Starfield does look like No Man's Sky in a lot of ways, but in a lot of ways it doesn't. In a lot of ways it looks like a Bethesda game. It looks like The Outer Worlds to me. And I think that's more like, if you talk about the whole of the experience and what's gonna feel like to play Starfield, it's gonna feel like playing a Bethesda game. Thank you guys so much for watching. I don't make these kinds of videos anymore, but as you could probably tell, it's kind of a passion project. I'm really excited for Starfield. So if you enjoyed this, if you wanna see more things like this, go ahead, like the video, hit the subscribe button, click that bell to turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Thanks again for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.